Hi, it's me, Ingrid INFP, and we're going to be talking about autistic terms I didn't understand. And I'm late diagnosed autistic, got diagnosed 6 months ago, and I live in Sweden, but I grew up in France. This video is basically a reaction video, or not a reaction video, but it's inspired by Dana Anderson, who's also an autistic creator, who also made a video about terms that she didn't understand. So I'm going to take some of the terms that she didn't understand, because I didn't understand them either, and maybe a few others of my own. It could be terms, but I think it's also like concepts. And a lot of the diagnostic criteria for autism is very clinical and not very easy to understand in terms of like applying it to your own life, because we're not like walking pathologies, so it's hard to relate to these deficits that are in the diagnostic criteria for autism. Anyway, the first one is literal thinking. And I thought that I wasn't a literal thinker because I can understand metaphors, and that's not really what it is. I think that we need to imagine like how being a neurotypical would be, and I think that like I'll hear the expressions and I'll know what they mean, like in real life, but I will still think of the literal meaning of them at the same time as I'm thinking of the metaphorical meaning of them. So I'll know that it's raining cats and dogs. I'll know that it's not literally raining cats and dogs, but it's raining, a lot. I know that, and I'll understand that immediately. But I'll still be having like that extra thought of cats and dogs falling from the sky, I'll still have that extra little thought, which I think that neurotypicals maybe have abstracted themselves so much from that expression, since they know what it means, that they don't literally think of cats and dogs. And that applies for other expressions as well. Since I grew up in France and I came to Sweden later on, so I didn't really get to learn all the expressions as a child. One of these expressions in Swedish is högt i tak, which means high ceiling. And high ceiling means, in Swedish, it means that you can have all sorts of discussions, that you can be honest with each other, that you can have any kind of discussion with each other. However, for me, I kept mixing up with, like, I guess, ambition, like hitting the glass ceiling. So I never understood why people were like, oh, it's so positive that we have a high ceiling. And I was like, wait, why would it be positive to have a high ceiling? Does that mean that you need to work extra hard to get to the ceiling? And I realized that I was interpreting the whole thing wrong. And that's why I think that it's important to see, like, a way of seeing it is that autism is a different culture. It's like you come to another country, you know the language somehow, but you don't know the culture of the place, and you don't know their specific expressions. So it's like if I were to go to Ireland or Australia, places that I've never been, I can speak English, but I don't know the subtleties of each, like, of the expressions, Maybe I've learned it by studying it, or by being around other Australians, Irish people, Scottish people, or whatever, but I'm not native from the area. So that's kind of how it is to learn these expressions. And so I learned them, but it doesn't come as naturally to me. Also, because of my literal thinking, I also interpret the diagnostic criteria literally. So that means that I misinterpret what is actually meant in the diagnostic criteria. So that makes it extra hard. And that is kind of the basis for the misunderstandings that I've had across the other things I'll talk about in this video. So another one is black and white thinking. I thought literally that black and white thinking was that it's that you either think something is super good, like the best, or that you think that it's the worst. When really black and white thinking can be more subtle than that. It can be thinking just very negatively about the thing or very positively about the thing, and not really, it's not that you can't see the nuance, it's that you have a hard time sitting in that space of being in the nuance, and like you can't really it's just harder to sit in that gray zone and be okay with things not being one way or another way. There are many other ways in between. So I think that black and white thinking, I was thinking literally black and white, and I wasn't seeing that there are several shades of gray. And black and white thinking could be that you think like, like off-white and darkish gray. That could also be black and white thinking, because you're not seeing the whole spectrum of all the colors that it could be, because your brain is overwhelmed by so many things at the same time, that it has to choose between one or the other. So it doesn't need to be the absolute best and absolute worst. You just have a hard time seeing all of the possibilities because you're focusing on one side. So that's what black and white thinking is. Then we've got you've got repetitive movements, which is stimming. I thought literally, once again, that repetitive movements meant the same movement all the time. When stimming is not always the same movement all the time. It could be the same series of movements all the time, or a limited variety of movements. So like when you're playing with a fidget toy, you're not always doing the same repetitive motion of squishing the squish ball, You're not just doing that. Sometimes you might pass the ball from one set of the hands to the other. Maybe you might squish the ball with your thumb or your forefinger or whatever. Or you might hold the ball up here or down by your waist, or up by your head, and be doing a repetitive motion. But it's not exactly the same thing. It's not exactly the same motion. So being repetitive does not mean exactly the same. And so, I'd be like, oh, well, so that's for the repetitive movements of like the stimming of something. Like rocking back and forth does not always have to be in this direction. You could also be swaying like this, or you could be swaying another part of your body, but it would still be counted as a repetitive movement. Another thing I also thought literally about was, the fear of change and the repetitive patterns of thinking. And I thought, oh, you just think about the same thing all the time and in the same way. But that's not true for me. For me, like, the repetitive thought might, be different over time. It's just about the same topic. Or I might, for example, walk the same path from my house to work and have to kind of internally plan in my head a minute beforehand, oh, I'm going to take this other street instead of this one that's behind this house, rather than the one that's in front of the house. That is a resistance to change, It doesn't mean that I had to sit at home and plan it out and write it out so that I was going to, change course. It's more that I have to mentally prepare myself that, okay, I'm going to go this way instead. And that mental preparation can just take 1 second, but it's still a mental preparation. It's not like, that I'm completely okay with going spontaneously in one way or another. So that was something that I took literally, rather than like, you know, having nuance, having seeing the many ways that this could be true. And that's kind of how it is with all of the different things. Another thing that I thought was basically limited and intense, restricted interests. I thought that restricted interests meant interests that were specific to a very weird, strange little detail, when really restricted means not many or not a large variety. So like, I'm interested in MBTI and personality in general, and that's quite a broad topic. However, I don't have many interests apart from that, and I spend a lot of time specifically on that interest. Another one is that I'm interested in cults, and I happen to be interested in the Mormon cults, but in general I'm interested in cults, and that is quite a broad topic, and it goes into interest in the religions and such, but it's like, outside of these two topics, there aren't that many topics that engage me to that same extent, well, I think that for neurotypical people or non-autistic people, it might be a more of a wide range of things, that it isn't a restricted amount of interest. And I also thought that the restricted interests, obviously I thought that, they would be something technical like trains or something that you would be really good at, when really you don't need to be good at or know a lot about your special interests for it to be your special interests. So that is what I now have learned about the subject. Then we get to routines. So I think that Dana Anderson made a good point about how we might have grown up with no way to have a routine. Now for me, I realize now, I thought about my childhood and like, why can't I have a routine? And the routine, that the way that you stereotypically think of an autistic person with routines is that, like, by 8 o'clock they have to eat breakfast, and that by 8:30 they have to go shower, and etc., and it's like calibrated to the minute, and that you have to do all of these steps and at a certain specific time and all that. Now for me, I do actually have kind of a routine, even though I don't have any discipline to do all the things in my routine in order, and I don't have the energy to do extra things in my routine. My routine is quite scaled off, like there's not a lot of it. But I realized it actually has something to do with the way that I grew up, in that I grew up in a hoarder house, so obviously we couldn't really clean. Also, my parents, it was really a hard thing to get the bathtub going, and we didn't. My dad would turn off the hot water because he was paranoid about us using hot water. There were a lot of, not very sane ideas going on in my house. So I didn't get into the routine of that whole hot water thingy and all of the steps that you're supposed to follow when it comes to that. And so I really got into the routine of going to bed at a certain time, and that has been since I was a child. And so actually I don't have that much of a problem of going to bed on time, as opposed to certain other things that I have a lot of problems with. One of the other things I have, so I have a problem with like brushing my teeth and all that, but I don't have the same problem when it comes to eating breakfast every morning. So some people have a lot of hard time eating breakfast because they never really ate breakfast as a child. I don't feel hungry and all that. But for me, my system, like, I get hungry in the morning and I eat in the morning, and it's just become a routine that I eat in the morning. And so that's not something that I miss in my routines. So I actually do have a routine, even though like the things that I would like to incorporate in my routine are things that are difficult for me to incorporate. But so a routine is your own. It's not anybody else's. And you might have a very eccentric routine, you know, or you might have a routine that works for certain things but not for others. You know, like I'll brush my hair every morning. That's also a thing that's in my routine because that was something that I did, you know, and that was something that I've done since I was a kid, you know. But if I ended up cutting my hair, then I would feel like completely wrong in my routine, you know. I would feel like I would feel like I was, so I would feel like my routine is disturbed, you know, because suddenly if I were to like shave my head off, like my hair off, my head, I would not have the brushing the hair part of it, and it would feel like I'm missing something. Or if I, you know, suddenly added something to my routine, which I have now with the brushing of the teeth, I feel like it's an extra chore that I have to think about every single time, and it takes a long time for things to change in my routine. So yeah, the routine thing was something that I had, I thought I didn't have any routine, and that's why I couldn't be an autistic person, but actually I do have a routine, and I do get disrupted if it isn't the way that I'd like it to be. And the frustration doesn't need to mean me getting into a meltdown, you know? It just means that I get, yeah. I think that there's something to church bells being for autistic people. You know, like it's always the same thing all the time, except that they changed the you know, the 6 o'clock bells. They always I think that they change according to the seasons. Anyway, so that's another thing, is that for me it's really hard to adapt to the seasons because my routine changes with the seasons, and I wish it wasn't that way, but it kind of has to be that way because like I can't sit outside in front of the library when it's winter time, and now I've started incorporating that in my routine, and it's hard going through these transitions. It's also like really light outside at this time of day, while in, you know, in the middle of winter it's like pitch dark at this time, so that's really hard for me. So that is also difficulty with transitions, and I thought that it was the same thing as difficulty with change, but transitions is between different tasks. So yes, I have a problem with that, but I thought that that meant that you were, you know, rigid, and that's where the rigid thinking is also a thing that I misinterpreted, because nobody wants to be a rigid thinker, you know? It sounds like you're cold and that you don't have, you know, people want to be flexible, you know? And it's not considered a positive thing to be a rigid thinker. And I think that this is where neurotypicals maybe, you know, see this from the outside as rigid thinking, when what happens is the monotropism, basically being interested in one thing at a time, and the fact that we become so distressed at change, that it it makes us stuck on certain thoughts, and that is what the rigid thinking is, rather than the fact that like we're mean to people, or that we're you know people that aren't easy to have anything to do with, or when you're rigid you would think that you're not worth talking to, when really rigid thinking just means that you get stuck on certain things. And it doesn't mean that you're not open-minded. Open-mindedness is a different thing than being a rigid or not rigid thinker. You can be really open-minded and be a rigid thinker as well. Those two things aren't, they're not opposites from each other, So that is something that I also misinterpreted, I think. Let me think. Oh yeah, another thing is a lack of social contact. It could also be a difference in eye contact. For me, like, I can do eye contact, but it's not something that I like doing, so I'd rather not. So I do some eye contact, and then it's kind of like I have to play a game with myself to make as much eye contact as possible, which isn't how neurotypical people do it, I also think that there's this whole, deficits in social communication and interaction and all that. And that doesn't sound good. And it doesn't mean that we're not interested in people, It just means that we see the world in a different way and communicate in a different way, and so therefore it makes for mixed communications, basically. Some autistic people are not really interested in talking to other people, but I am interested in other people. It's just that I don't want to interact in the way that they interact with me. So that is another misunderstanding that I had about the different terms. Then we've got other terms that aren't in the diagnostic criteria, like monotropism, which I thought was like literally just thinking about one thing at a time, when it feels like a chaos in my brain where I'm thinking about lots of things at the same time, I feel. But if I could do the way that I wanted to do things, then I would focus on one thing at a time. And really, nobody is able to multitask in the world. Multitasking is a myth. So when you're doing several things at the same time, you're basically like going from one tab to the other and switching all the time, which is not the way that I want to do things. I want to be done with a certain thing before I go to the next thing. Another thing that I misinterpreted was being detail-oriented, because I've grown up with the MBTI, so I thought that I was more of a group, or like as an intuitive, I would be more big picture. I don't think that being big picture or being detail-oriented are opposites. I think there's the top, bottom, and bottom up thinking, which I think makes a little bit more sense, in that we all have to deal with details, and we have to deal with the big picture. It's just what do you start with, and how do you build the big picture, or how do you come to the details that's important. And I think that as an autistic person, you're more likely to focus on the details, and then you'll build a big picture from that, while for a neurotypical person, you're more likely to see the big picture, and from that then choose to focus in on a certain thing. but it's a starting point that's different. It's not the fact that we can't look at the big picture, or that we can't see the details. It's what we start with and how we build our view of things. So that's what I would say about that. Another thing is rejection sensitivity dysphoria. I thought that it was like basically romantic people, rejection in terms of breakup, but rejection could be criticism, it could be anything really. So I definitely have problems with that. And I'm catching the last ray of sunlight here. Pathological demand avoidance or persistent drive for autonomy. I'm still learning about that. It's a profile of autism. It's not a trait that all autistic people have. I think it's not well studied, so I don't know if I'm misinterpreting it or not. So we'll leave it at that. I might have missed something that Dana had talked about, but I think that we're done for now. Tell me what you guys think. Did you misinterpret these terms when you were learning about autism? Also, are there other terms that you misinterpreted? I might have forgotten some that are easy to have a problem with. I wrote some notes down and then I forgot them at home, so we're not going to be able to use them. But I'll look at the others on the piece of paper, and if I come up with something new, then I will say it in another video. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. Bye.